Hello, eReads podcast listeners. It is your host, Liz, and welcome to my podcast where I talk about authorship, books, and all the different elements of the creative process. Now, I have a question for you. Is your life memoir worthy? Well, listen, if you're not sure about the answer, Linda, my guest for this episode, is going to help you figure that out. She gives us all the tips and tricks on how to turn your stories into a memoir to help and inspire others. So let's jump right into this episode. Welcome, Linda. How are you?
Hi, Liz. I am doing great. Thank you.
Lovely. And to welcome you to the show, I have a book-related question, just something light and fun. And my question for you is, what is your favorite genre to read?
Wow, that's a tough one because I just love to read as long as it's a good book. I'll read anything as long as it's well written. Right now I'm reading fiction and nonfiction, but I jump around, But I think it's more of
then I have a question.
Book,
Okay, so what are the components of a well-written book for you?
Okay, for me, the first thing I notice that drives me crazy is if the dialogue doesn't sound real. If it sounds forced, or there's all of these dialogue tags like she whispered and he breathed, and they drive me crazy, and I'll just stop reading. And so the first thing before I get a book is I look for a page with dialogue on it to see, am I going to be able to handle this? Because I'm real picky, So
That is a good trick.
and I like a book that, obviously, you jump right into the story. So there's no, wishy-washy beginning. I'm pretty fussy that, it has to grab my attention. But I will I'm really, I'm not a quitter. And I've actually struggled through some books where I've gotten to almost done and I realized, why am I reading this?
Oh my gosh,
yes. So then I'll actually stop, like 3/4 of the way through and think, okay, I really am done. But now, I think it's something I really admire Stephen King. I mean, I used to like his scary books way back when. Then he got really weird and I stopped reading them. And then I started reading his more recent books. And he is an excellent writer. And he knows how to do dialogue. He knows how to suck you into a story. And it's something that he said a long time ago that he says, for me, he says, if it's a good story, if it doesn't read like writing.
Oh.
And he's right, because if it reads like, it's hard to explain. In other words, if you're so caught up in the story that you don't even know you're reading, you've got this motion picture going in your head, that's a well-written story.
That's a good way to sum it up, because I felt like that and didn't have words, but that is a good way to sum it up. I just hate that when they're like words on a page, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't read for that. I read to be immersed, and so absolutely, I so feel that.
Yep. Yeah, and I think when I read that, I thought that's exactly it. And and his books don't read like writing. You are so in the story, and that you have to snap yourself back to the real world when you stop reading because you're just so there.
Which begs the question: you write a lot of or in the memoir genre. Is that hard to do, to have that immersion?
It took me a while to figure that out because I'd never written when I wrote my first book, I'd never written a book, and I didn't know I could write a book, and I didn't know that I had one until it was written, and it was like, I guess I wrote a book, and then I started looking for a publisher. But it is hard to, and that's one of the keys that I read, is that you must inhabit the moment. So a good memoir shouldn't be floating around like you're saying, well, then I went here and I went there, and
Right.
you're actually in the story, so you're going to be writing it like you are immersed in the scene. And once I got the hang of that, I thought, I got it. I mean, once you get it, it's like, oh, okay, that's what makes it read. And it doesn't read like a story, it is a story. And
Oh,
so
that's
that was
lovely.
tricky to get, but once I got it, I felt more comfortable, and it made my second book a lot easier because I've immerse yourself in the scene, be there, and
Mm.
then your reader is there with you.
Oh, I love that. And tell us about your authorship journey. Like, did you always want? I know you mentioned you didn't know if you had a story in you. So how did it come to be?
Well, so yeah, I had no idea I was going to write a book. I happened to go through a whole bunch of really life-changing events all at the same time. So I got a divorce. I lost my job right after the
Mm,
divorce, and then my mom died.
mm.
And I couldn't find work. This is back in 2008 when everything was just
Oh,
really upside down, and
right.
I didn't know if I was ever going to find a job. And I just bought a house, and I was like, oh, it was just a horrible time. And so I had a lot of time on my hands while I was looking for work and not finding anything. And I thought, I got to find something to do. And so one day I remembered it was when I was in college, and I took a um it was just English 101, and we had to write a short story. So back in the day, I was one of the first women to work on a Forest Service fire crew. So I had a lot of adventures, and I did this for 7 years. So my short story was my first fire, and the instructor said, this is really good. Can I keep this to show future students, what a good short story is? And I was like, wow, sure, and that was back, of course, before computers, and I actually typed it, I think, on my typewriter. And so I didn't have a copy, and I thought, I know what would be fun, see if I can recreate that. And of course, and then it kind of went on, and I realized, oh, this is really a nice distraction from everything that's going on in my life. So
Mm.
so I just continued to write, and I had 90 pages, and I showed it to some friends, and they're like, well, this is really good, you should expand this. And I thought, what the heck, I got nothing else to do. So 400 pages later, I realized, oh, I guess I have a book, but I didn't know if it was any good, and I didn't.
Mm.
So I joined a writers group in my community, and um, and I was getting a lot of encouragement. Yeah, you have a good story to tell. It's just figuring out how to tell it. And
Mm.
then in the meantime, I met an author here in my community who published traditionally, and she said, I think you should start querying agents. I said, okay. So I had to teach myself how to do that. I had to teach myself how to write a book proposal. Um, and I was getting a lot of rejections, as we do. But I just don't quit. I'm very tenacious. And so I kept improving the story. I kept querying, and it took me 2 years, but I started getting noticed. And all the while, I'm continuing to improve my story, especially if I got feedback. Now, usually agents, the silent treatment, you get crickets. But every now and then, one would actually say something, you know,
Mm.
and yeah, it stung, it'd be something critical, or, well, it'd be better if you did this or that. But I took it to heart, and I thought, these people know what they're talking about,
Mm.
and you may not like what they have to say, but they know what they're talking about. So after I let it settle for a couple days, I went right back to writing, and I would take their advice and make the changes
Mm.
they suggested. And
Yeah.
one of them was, I think you need to start the story in a different place. And I was kind of suspicious that that might be necessary. So I
Yeah.
set the manuscript aside, and I started over. And I rewrote the first two chapters with a bang. And then I started getting noticed. And then I started sending out full manuscripts, and I had a couple small presses notice me, and a couple made an offer. So I
Lovely.
really wanted an agent, but it's been 2 years and I have an offer. so so I took it. you know.
Absolutely. It made me think like you were talking about like you're sending out and you're getting critique, you're getting rejections. how do you know uh, how do you know the critique to hold on to? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how do you shift through that?
Well, so and I got a lot of that in the writers group too. They would say, change this or change that. And I'd think about it and I think, is that true to my story? If it's not true to my
Mm,
story, I'm not changing it.
I
But
love
when
that.
it
Mm,
comes, yeah, when it comes to the agent telling me, it just doesn't start out with a bang. You need to come up,
mhm,
get a different place to start your story. That was hard to hear because I liked where it started. You always like your writing and you don't want to change it. But then I realized, they're right. And so you'll know it's like a gut feeling of, okay, is this my ego in the way?
mm,
Or are they giving me, I mean, again, if it's coming from an agent or a publisher, they know what sells. So, you know, but there was a few times that they said, oh, something really, oh, you should rewrite it as fiction. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. It's a true story and I'm sticking with it. So I ignored those
mm.
comments.
I think that's like really great advice because, right, everyone has an opinion, but everyone's opinion is valid, but it may not be valid for your story. And what I mean by that is like,
Right.
you knew you didn't want to go the fiction route, right? So like changing that, while maybe okay, fine, it satisfies this one person, that's not the story you want to tell. And again, you don't want to change, in my opinion, you don't want to change your story so much that you don't even recognize it.
Yeah,
And
no,
so
exactly. You can't write a story for everybody. Not everybody's gonna
Mm,
like it,
yeah.
and so, yeah, you have to make a decision, whose story is this?
Mm,
And it would be the same thing because I had a number of beta readers, and so again, sorting out, their advice, and there were times where I'd think, "No, that's how you would tell it.
yeah.
That's not how I'm
Mm,
gonna tell it."
mm,
But if they said, "This needs to be clearer," or "This
right.
jumps here and I'm lost," or, stuff like that, that I can deal with. But when they
Mhm.
start rewriting your paragraphs for you and I'm like, "No, I wouldn't say it that way, so that's not me."
Mhm, and I think that's, again, a really good distinction, right? Of, I wouldn't say it like that, right? Because
Mhm.
again, I think it's also very helpful, whether they're friends, critique partners, literary agents, when they're like, this is unclear, or were you trying to go in this direction? Because it helps you make those connections. And
Yep.
I just think that makes a stronger book versus like, oh, yeah, well, I wanted this character to go like this. Well, that's your book. That's not
Yeah,
my book.
exactly. Exactly, and people and it's I would have to say that a a beta reader that was an author were a little more cruel in their comments than just a reader who was offering me feedback of,
Mm,
"Well, I lost you here," or,
right.
things like that, and you need both. You do need both, but you have
Yes.
to have very thick skin because your book's not gonna get any better if you don't
Ab-
let yourself, let people critique it and then decide, I'm letting that go. Thanks for your input. I appreciate your time. And you don't have to do everything they say by any
mm.
means. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very great advice and tidbits because, again, and great context, because everyone says you have to have thick skin, but you also have to know what not to take. And so you gave us a lot of context around that, which I think is helpful, especially like if you're new to writing, you want to do
Mhm.
it right and you feel like you take on everything.
Oh
And then
yeah,
you're like, I don't like this because you forgot to add your voice to all of that critique.
exactly. And it's real hard. I mean, when you're new, you don't really know what your voice is, or you
Right.
think you know, and then you realize, well, maybe I don't. And and then you got all that doubt. And so don't second guess your voice, which is in your heart.
Mm,
You'll feel, that, yeah, they have a good point there. Maybe I don't totally agree, but I see their point. So
mhm,
maybe part of their critique is valid. but you have to break that apart. Okay, this part was good. This part, I'm not going there.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't helpful. And a good critique partner won't take offense to that. I've had some say, "Well, excuse me," and that was the end of, okay, well, we're just not working out, so thank you anyway, because
Mm.
you have to be able to accept it, and they have to be able to accept that you're not going to do what they say.
That's a really good point too. In when you are having critique partners or getting
Mhm.
feedback, making sure that person understands when you disagree or choose to go in a different direction. That can be also really valuable because you want to be able to take critique, but you also want to be able to say, "Ah, no, that's not for me," and not fall out.
Yeah, and it was something that, I mean, I was doing a lot of beta reading for, and I thought beta reading was one of the best things that I've done because it's much easier to see what's not working in someone else's writing than your own.
That's why I love reading.
Yes, and then applying it to your own work, "Why, that sure doesn't work well, so I won't do that." And so, I learned a lot from it, and I'm still friends with some of these people. It's been 8 years, and we're still friends, and they're still writing, and I'm still writing, and we still share each other's work.
I love that. I love that. Tell us more about your writing. So you went to the route of memoirs, and it kind of a question that comes to mind. Why do a memoir? What makes you, or someone wake up and say like, I'm gonna do a memoir? What drew you there?
Well, so, a lot of people think, "Oh, it's just, I'm gonna write the story of my life and everybody's gonna love it." And no, not necessarily. What's interesting to you might not be interesting to someone else. But I went through a lot. So not only did I take on a job that women weren't welcome in, so there was that aspect of fighting to do what I wanted to do, and I felt like women would get something out of that. That
Mm-hmm.
the tenacity and uh, the drive to continue to do a line of work where I was treated terribly. And and then there's that part of the story, but then there's a part of the story where my life completely changes. So not only did I have to overcome adversity in that line of work that I chose, now my life has changed dramatically, and I had to rebuild my life more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like this was something that people would get something out of, So how do you rebuild your life when everything falls apart and you thought you knew where you were going, and it's not going to happen? There's a couple
Mm-hmm.
things you can do. You can curl up and cry and say, my life is over, or you figure it out and think, okay, so what can I do to make this better? And I'm not saying that I was out there, oh, I know what I'm going to do. It was hard. It was a hard decision, and it took a lot. And this is something that my early readers told me. They said, "You could have given up, and you never gave up." And I said, "Yeah, I know, but I wasn't happy about it." And they said, "Well, that doesn't matter." Now, a lot of people, a lot of people aren't happy about life changes. It's like, well, this isn't fair, and life's not fair. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's still a challenge, and it's one of these things where, do I like it? No. Do I, immediately recognize I'm gonna have to make a change? No. So I think that people they find in my stories is that, you can find a way.
Mm-hmm.
If the things aren't going the way you thought they were gonna go, it's not the end of the world, and it may feel like it, but it's not. And so, like, I just felt like I had, something to share, and I was hoping people would relate to that and learn something from that.
Absolutely. And I also kind of hear you saying, like, thinking about the themes under the events, right? Like you mentioned, like women being able to grasp being in that environment where it's not a very female dominated space, hardship. And I think that is really key. Like you mentioned, everyone has a story to tell. It just may not be interesting to the other person. And so really thinking about what can people get from your story. And I think
Yeah.
that ties back into that original thing where you talked about that immersion,
Mhm.
because you get the through lines of, this is what I want people to get. These are the themes, and that can really help, you highlight these events. So really great advice.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've read a number. Betty read a number of memoirs that were just all. I mean, it's like I got up in the morning and I went out and
Yes.
I fixed breakfast and then I had a cup of coffee and I'm like, seriously. And
Yes.
this went on, for chapters. And I said, I'm not really relating to this. And they got
Yeah.
mad at me. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I guess we're not a good fit because you don't have a story here. You're telling me it's like reading your diary, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
so and it's hard, now, I am working on a 3rd book, and it's not memoirs, and it's hard because I'm not good at making stuff up, I I can I lived this stuff, so I can write about things that have happened to me, and I hope I can weave it into a good story, but when you're making it up, it's like, wow, there's days where I just stare at the page and think, "I have no idea where I'm going with this." And it's So then I said, "Okay, then it's time to edit." So I go back to the beginning, you know, yeah, because I figure it'll come to me, as I go through
Abs-
again.
Absolutely. I gotta try that sometimes, getting stuck and just go back and editing, so that way you're just not staring at the same a blank page. I love that. But
W
Linda,
Well,
please
it
tell us.
does because it kind of reminds you of what you built so far,
Yes.
and then it kinda gives you and then when you get to where you left off, you're like, "Oh, I know where I wanna go with this," so it can be helpful, it's like
Absolutely. Linda, tell us, where can folks find your books? Where can they connect with you?
Okay, so Summers of Fire, a memoir of love and courage, and the prequel to Summers and Fire, Uprooted, A New Life in the Arizona Sun, are both available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, as well as Bookshop. I do have a blog for my book. That's summersoffire.blogspot.com, and on Summers of Fire, I have a lot of on my blog. I have other interviews. I have articles I've written about the writing process. A lot of the things that we've just talked about. I had when I was marketing my book. I mean, as you know, that's a never-ending thing. I I landed an interview or actually a segment on a PBS show called Arizona Illustrated, where they came and filmed a story about me, so that's on there, and that's pretty cool. And so those are places they can find me. I also have a Facebook author page.
Lovely. And if y'all missed any of that, it will be in the episode show notes. So check that out. Um, Linda, thank you so very much. I have
Welcome.
two more questions. One
Sure.
is, if you had any words of encouragement or advice for those that are like, I feel like my life is interesting, or this really interesting event happened. How do I make it appeal to others, right? Like, where should they start?
So where to start? The where to start is a real tough one, and as I've said earlier, I ended up bailing from my original beginning and jumping right into it, and I did have to do a flashback to catch up, to bring it to the current story, and that's one way to approach it. But I say just start writing and get it all down, and that's what I did unknowingly. That's how I end up with 400 some pages. Of course I edited a lot of that out, so but just get it down and then start editing and then start going back and saying, okay, where do I need what am I trying to get across to people? Do I have it in here? Because if you're busy worrying about that while you're writing it, you'll never get it written. you
Hmm.
know just get it down to the best of your ability, and then go back and start looking at it. And sometimes the thing I had a number of themes appear after I wrote it that I didn't realize were there too. You
Mm.
start to think, wait a minute, then there's that, and then you can go in and enhance that using real life events. Don't make stuff up to make the story better. There's a lot of controversy about memoir, about, well, I don't remember what I said. Well, that's okay. Dialogue, you get the gist of it. That's fine. But no making stuff up to make the story better.
I might have to have you come back and talk more about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Every now and then I get it. I'm on several Facebook memoir writing groups, and that topic gets a lot of attention. And I have a very strong opinion about that because I've had people say, "Oh, well, I just thought it'd be more fun if it had this in there." And I'm like, no, it's not memoir.
That's good to know. Oh, Linda, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.